Greetings to everybody, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Teacher Talks. My name is Christopher Hansen. I have the distinct privilege of serving my community at Seattle Pacific University as the Director of Music Education and Orchestral Studies. I am joined with me today with a dear friend and colleague that it's interesting enough, our relationship has really just matured virtually. We've met each other once in person at a conference, but we've really gotten to know each other virtually over the past few months. And I am so grateful to have Dr. James Ray with us today. This is his third visit to Teacher Talks, but this was something that was sort of promised in our previous sessions. So we met for the first time and had an incredible conversation about just music education and where we are and where we hope we're going in the midst of this pandemic. And I said I wanted to check back in to talk about how plans are maturing and ideas are maturing for this coming year. And then in the second session, as we did in the first, we just really went into this incredible conversation and got taken away by how teachers are responding to things and the promise, sort of the hope of the creativity that we're seeing, but then ultimately really questioning the systems that exist in higher ed. How are we training teachers and what are we looking at from a university perspective? So I tagged James again and said, hey, I want to come back for a third part and really get into what's happening in higher ed and how are we responding to things. Even though the conversation will start there, nothing is really sacred. We're going to explore lots of different areas and topics. And I hope that people that are watching that are either college university students or are practicing teachers or retired educators, or even artists that are just trying to understand what education looks like that might not have their private studio going right now or their community music programs going. I hope that you can glean something from this conversation, and please feel free to join us. As always, even though you see two people on the screen, I hope that you will join us and post your comments and questions on Facebook or on YouTube. We're streaming live on both platforms. And I want to just dive into the conversation today, spend as much time as we can sort of exploring these topics. I usually add a little bit of a buffer, about 5 minutes for people to be able to tune in. But I want to get talking. James, I've missed you, and I want to be able to find out what you're doing and how you're preparing and kind of where the year is. Before we do that, I would like to just take a brief moment to offer a prayer, just a moment of reflection. Whatever prayer means to you, however you want to participate in that, it's just an opportunity to sort of ground us before the conversation. And I am letting my son know that he is not allowed to have any more cookies right now until after lunch is done. No, sir, you need to wait.
That's awesome.
This is how you know it's live, people.
Right.
Live. Please join me for a moment of reflection. Lord, thank you for these resources. Thank you for this opportunity to connect with colleagues and friends through technology, to have the conversations that we yearn to have, to be thinking about the possibilities that exist before us, Lord, not just the limitations. Help us to refocus on the incredible hope that you provide us with, that things will get better and that we will come through these struggles and these challenges, having improved ourselves and the students that we engage through music. We pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
So, James, tell me, are you back already? Are you teaching?
No, not officially.
Okay.
I'm officially on contract in a couple of days. I think the 16th is our contract day, and then students show up a week after that. On the 23rd is our first day of classes. And
oh, wow.
So it's coming up. How about you?
So we started at the beginning of the month, which we usually do, came under contract and did some professional development things. And then we go back tomorrow. Tomorrow's our first day. Now
it's here.
Yeah. Interestingly though, because are you on a quarter system or semester?
Yeah,
quarter. So are you guys actually going all the way into December?
Yeah. So our quarter stretches into like a couple of weeks before Christmas or so.
Got you. See, so I actually appreciate that they did this. The university is anticipating with a lot of other people that there could be a surge in the winter,
Sure.
Because of flu season hitting and mixing. So they actually bumped us up 2 weeks. Usually would start at the end of September.
Yeah.
But we're starting September 14th, and then we'll be done on November 24th.
So for Thanksgiving.
So we'll be, yeah. So once people go home for Thanksgiving, the idea is that they'll be able to stay home through the winter break and hopefully ride out, God willing, what I hope is not anything bad.
Yeah.
But just to prevent that. And I've seen a lot of things about that, which have made me really anxious. And I just hadn't thought about it, of course. We're kind of taking a day at a time. That with flu season happening, we're not really going to know because the symptoms are similar. a lot of the safety practices and measures that we're putting in place, someone might just have the cold, but we have to treat it like it's COVID. And
Hmm.
so I really do get it. At first I was a little disgruntled because we were bumping things up, but they gave us a lot of notice. And as you said, it's here. We're
Yeah.
I start teaching tomorrow. So
Yeah.
and now, are you going to be able to do hybrid? Are you going to see some students, or what's it look like over there?
Yeah, so in the latest iteration, at first, way back in the ancient days of like April, they were giving each faculty member the choice about whether they
Yeah.
wanted to come on campus or stay virtual. And I'd opted for virtual from the get go. I was kind of first in line on that. But since then, the plan has evolved to where almost everything is going to be virtual. I haven't seen the list of exceptions. I'm guessing within the music department, like maybe some ensembles, are they going to let them come in person? But everything I'm teaching, my music ed classes, I've got a upper string pedagogy and I've got music theory. That's all virtual.
Oh, wow.
But what they are doing is even the things that are online, kind of a hybrid of what SPU sounds like they're doing. After November, even though our quarter is going to go a couple more weeks, no one's coming back to campus. So everyone's going to finish the quarter virtually.
That's surreal.
Yeah.
Now, can I ask, and please, feel free to answer however you're comfortable.
Hmm.
So, what sort of fueled you to immediately respond with, "I want to be virtual"? Is it, are you at risk, or are you just worried about that exposure for students? Where did that come from?
Yes, 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 and yes. So, I guess the biggest impetus for me was the fact that even then it was clear, or it seemed pretty clear to me that there wasn't going to be a viable path whereby this virus would be under control by the time September hit. And sure enough, here we are. Just based on the way the wind was blowing, so to speak, both in terms of the way the virus was spreading, the leadership or lack thereof, depending on depending on which level of government you're looking at. And so it was very, it seemed pretty plausible to me that we'd still be in the thick of this. And with cold and flu season, like you mentioned, on top of that, it didn't seem to make any sense to kind of put anyone at risk. And then on top of that, pretty much everyone in my family has some kind of underlying health something. My daughters and I each have some form of asthma. My wife's got her own medical things that she's been dealing with, and so even from a personal level, it just didn't make sense. So the fact that we have that option seemed like just a natural opening to just go ahead and opt to go online, and everyone's been cool about it. Because every faculty has a choice. But the interesting thing was at that point they were also telling students that they all had the choice about whether they wanted to come back to campus or not, or to stay online. So it brought up this question, well, hold on a second. What if this kid, this student, decides to come onto campus for this one 300 level class that's only offered once by this professor who's opted to stay home? So I was kind of scratching my head about that, but it turns out that pretty much everybody's online now anyway, so moot point.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I hesitate to say this in juxtaposition because there is no judgment or pretense about this. Um, for me personally, I was sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, that
Hmm.
I have learned, and for everyone watching, this is about me right now. I have learned that I don't like teaching virtually.
Yeah.
It is difficult for me. I don't feel effective. And even though, and I'm very grateful for this, I got some what I consider genuine feedback from my students who said that they thought that the virtual platforms worked well for what I was trying to do. But in the back of my mind, I just had this nagging of, but we didn't get to accomplish X, right? Like there were
Right.
these things that we needed to do, and I don't know when you're going to get it. And I felt just a lot of guilt coming out of the spring, even though I didn't receive it from anybody. It was just sort of the self-loathing of like, I needed to be in person. I needed to be in person. So
Yeah.
when they gave us the choice, I was waving the other banner. I was like,
Hmm.
yes, I want all of my classes in person. Everything I can do in person, I want to be in person.
Yeah.
Now, to be painfully candid, and my wife just got home from work, so I'm sure I'm within earshot with her, and she'll shoot a dirty look at me. I think a part of it was me also just wanting to escape my home, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, and I wish I could laugh at that. I don't like being confined.
Yeah.
I also like the work life separation. I want to be able to go to work, and I want to work there, and I want to come home and not work. And
Yeah.
all of us are struggling with that. We don't have that option anymore. Everything is happening in one place. Our dining room is an office again, which
Mhm.
we didn't want to have happen. And my wife is similar in a sort of a hybrid situation. She works from home most of the time, but then has to go into work usually about 2 days a week. So I was excited about, like, yes, I want to be able to go to campus, do what I need to do, and then come home and shut
Yeah.
down. Well, we did something similar where we gave students choice, which I think is very valuable and important. The faculty had choice, which is valuable and important. And I think there was a system, but I think there were, and I say this also without any judgment or condemnation, like there were a lot of systems, but then as the challenges evolved, a lot of the systems failed. So that
Yeah.
was never at anyone's fault. I've been very impressed with how my institution has responded to things, and that's not just because there's an SPU logo in the corner. Um, Genuinely, I've been really impressed with how they've responded to things, and we've stayed in communication in the summer, and we've been doing the extra work that needs to happen. But all of that being said, planning is a moot point. I mean, like, because we would,
Mhm.
all right, this is what we're going to do, and we'd start doing that, and then there'd be some new factor.
Right.
So as it stands right now, and as the dust settled, which has arguably made me feel kind of foolish, I am one of like two faculty members in the department that are actually going to teach in person.
Mhm.
So it's created this new dilemma that no one could anticipate, where and again, for people that are watching this, there's no judgment in this. Students are reaching out to me saying, all of my classes are online except yours. I now have to come to campus just for your class. And I empathize with that. I'm like, I get it. I don't want that to be the case, but I can't control what the other faculty want to do. And then I'm trying to like read these messages as if they're coded like, are you complaining or are you grateful? Like, are you, are you happy that you get to have in-person instruction? Or are you like
Mhm.
frustrated because you're only going to campus once a day? And so it's difficult to now navigate that, where I want to hold true to this design, but I also want to have sort of grace to say, yeah, if you can't come in. And then something I didn't anticipate, I was assuming students would be eager to come, which most of them have been, but then some of them have been in households where there are people at risk.
Sure.
Either they live with extended family, or parents or siblings, like you said, might have asthma, or these conditions that weaken their immune systems. And so it's weird to me, because it was like, you have a choice. I was like, great, I want to teach in person. Okay, but this, like, here's all these things that we need. Okay, let's mediate all of that. I still want to meet in person. And we got these emails that were like, to all the faculty, are you sure you still want to teach in person? Like, yes, I still want to teach in person. And then, like, leading up to the first week of instruction, it's been all of these things where I'm like, well, I still want to teach in person, but now I'm feeling foolish because I don't want to put my students at risk, and I have designed a class that will benefit from in-person instruction
Mhm.
and make it really meaningful. So it's not like I just wanted you to be in person because I don't like teaching virtually, which is
Yeah.
part of that's true, but like, no, like, I want every minute we have is going to be sacred time, and we're going to really capitalize on the fact that we are meeting in person. And I'm doing some, like, they'll meet twice a week. One day we're in person, one day we're online. And so I've got all these mixtures of that. But now I'm navigating students that are like, hey, I'm worried about coming to campus. I don't feel comfortable meeting in person. And they have the right to say that. And so now it's like, well, now I've got these two or three kids that need to be exclusively online. But now I'm going to have some people that are meeting in person. And then, if, God forbid, if anything happens and there's an outbreak on campus, everything's going to be shut down and going to be online.
Mhm.
So I have started to, just recently, like over this past week in preparing for the first day of school, I've started to question my decisions of, like, there's arguably a simplicity in terms of planning, of being able to do everything online, and I might just be complicating things trying to meet in person. But there's, one of the things, and this is, forgive me for that long-winded exposition, but the goal was to transition into how we're preparing our educators, because that's something I've been thinking about. Is one of the primary reasons that I gave for my department chair to consider that I want to meet in person is, God willing, this pandemic will not last forever. So
Mhm.
we will return to face-to-face instruction. And I want the students to get those pedagogical experiences. I want to be able to model it for them. I want them to be able to practice it and get feedback. And so I'm sort of trying to teach, which I would argue we all need to do. I'm trying to teach with the future in mind,
Sure.
that you will be in this place eventually. And although we need to talk about virtual learning and what that looks like in the music classroom, I don't want us to forget the importance of classroom management strategies and, body language and your demeanor and how you engage with students. And, like, I'm worried that that's getting overshadowed by the necessity to talk about virtual learning. How have you
Yeah.
felt about that?
Yeah, it kind of brings to mind the teaching piece I'm probably the most terrified about this fall, which is to say that I'm co-supervising two student teachers. So
Yeah.
in our music ed students typically do their student teaching in the fall. And so uh, both of these folks are obviously going to be in placements where they're probably going to be, student teaching online. And what does that even look like? I've had some conversations with students, not necessarily the ones I'm supervising, but where you and your cooperating teacher and your university supervisor, you're all in a way going to be on a very level playing field this fall,
Oh, yes.
because those of us who were trained in the old days and what I've heard referred to as the before times. I mean, I don't know about you, but there was
I
no
laugh
part
so
of
I
my
don't cry, right?
what was that?
I laugh so I don't cry because
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
terrifying that that's true. The
I
before times.
we're this post-apocalyptic thing, right? But none of us, and correct me if I'm wrong, none of us have had really serious training in how to
Oh,
teach
no.
any kind of musical anything over Zoom or whatever platform you're using. And so, I'll be visiting these classrooms through this webcam here, and the student's going to prepare lessons on I'm not sure what, because both these people are orchestral specialists.
Yep.
Um, and so I guess, I'm trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I, as a teacher mentor, help the student navigate this? Now, one of the things I think that's important that I've learned from other people who've done this a lot longer than I have in terms of the supervision piece is remembering, keeping in mind for myself that the student teacher's closest mentor is going to be their cooperating teacher. So
Yeah.
that's going to be their strongest bond. But I don't want to be just sitting there as a square on the screen and have absolutely nothing to contribute. So I'll have to be thoughtful about how I advise students in terms of watch what this veteran is doing. How are they taking? What flavor of lemonade are they making? And kind of to your point, one of the things that I think it's important for all of us to think about too is I think this virtual teaching stuff, I mean, it's different. It is a completely, utterly different ball of wax. But what what are some potential hidden blessings in this format? So I guess one of the things that I'm trying to think about, and I encourage all of us to think about, including our teachers in waiting, so to speak, is okay, this is strange, but pay attention to some of the things that happen over the course of the next 10 weeks or 15 weeks or however long. Pay attention to some of the things that turn out to be successful. You might be surprised. And then when we get to back to whatever normal will look like when this is all finished, is there anything of that you can keep? And one of my most vivid touchstones for this is I will be teaching. I have an upper string pedagogy class that I'm teaching this fall, which I just taught this spring. Which like everybody, trial by fire. How do I teach? I mean, our first conversation was how do I teach pedagogy in 10 weeks? Well, in the spring it was how do I teach
Yep.
it in 10 weeks online? Are you
Online.
kidding me? But but I was pleasantly surprised at how well it went. The sorts of tools I was able to use, the way students were able to interact, and how the different assignments I gave them, I was actually able to legitimately talk to them about actual pedagogy. Um, and so there are some pieces that I don't know that I would have done if I just taught it in person again. That even when I find myself on campus, I might keep some of this stuff. Whether it's some different videos or handouts I put together, or the way I kind of redesign some of the assignments. I'm not sure. I mean, I wouldn't do it. I'm not going to do it this way when I don't have to. But there are some elements that I can pull that might make even my in-person traditional teaching actually stronger. And so that's one of the things that again, in the spirit of making lemonade. Um, in going back to my fear is how do I help mentor these students? I guess I think that's probably going to be one of my recurring themes. Okay, this is strange. Let's navigate our way through this. I know your lesson plan says I'm going to teach tone production to a bunch of students, most of whom are probably using the microphones that are built into the computers, which you're not going to know much anyway. So how can we get creative about this? And then on the back end saying, okay, well, what about that worked really, really well, right? So again, just looking for, and honestly, some of it's just a sanity thing. So I keep myself from going crazy as soon as I otherwise might. Okay, find the positive. Find the positive. What is actually useful beyond this pandemic? Um, Yeah, I'm not sure where I started, but
No, and I love that you bring that up because this was a word that someone used in a professional development session I was in, and I admittedly had kind of forgotten it, although I know it's best practice and I know it's something that I implement in a casual way is the significance of metacognition. And without attempting to sound erudite or academic, for people that don't use it regularly, there's just the idea of being conscious of your learning, and that is something that the virtual learning I think has forced us to do because we're now thinking about thinking.
mhm,
We're philosophizing to a certain extent. We're asking our pre-service teachers, okay, how are you going to teach this? And how are you going to know that the students have learned it? How do you know that you've learned it? How do you, because we're looking for those affirmations that we would not look for otherwise. We would try to pick up on subtle cues, or we would be using some of those classroom management strategies, right, to look for, okay, they're nodding their heads or the body language tells me a certain thing. We've taken away those cues. So we're having to verbalize it now to say, do
mhm,
you understand? How can you let me know that you understand using words,
right.
communicating this knowledge you have? And that's invaluable. It's also, I love that you bring this up because I've experienced similar things that it's forced, I would dare say us, but I'll speak for myself. It's forced me to really go back to the root of what we do. What is teaching and learning? And what are those fundamentals? What are those building blocks of an educational situation or scenario? Or how does that play out? And I'm supervising a couple of student teachers this year also, talking to them about, they're like, well, I don't know. It's interesting. One of my student teachers was just really anxious about what this quarter was going to look like, how they were going to do it online. And I had to reassure them as well as myself to say, go back to the foundation.
Mhm,
What does it mean to introduce someone to a musical experience? And what does it mean for them to engage musically? And how do you perform assessments? And how to create targets and goals? And how do you scaffold towards those goals? I was like, let's go back to those sort of rudimentary foundational elements that I teach a course. I don't think you actually have this because you're a secondary instrumental specialist where you are. But so as the director of music ed, I get to sort of touch all the music ed classes. So I teach an introduction to music ed class.
mhm.
I don't know if you teach something like that in your load.
I don't. I've got another colleague, Patty
Gotcha.
Bourne, takes care of that.
Oh, well, amazing, right?
Yeah,
Um, so it's interesting to be able to teach that class because
yeah,
I get to introduce them to what I call educationese, like this all this educational jargon. But I think now I would dare say that a lot of my students as well as my colleagues have started to appreciate that because the technology has humbled all the disciplines. We're all dealing with the same platform to engage our students. And so now those conversations about assessments and differentiation and engagement and all that. Now all of that jargon is being used on a daily basis, and
yeah.
every teacher has to use it. And I arguably love that is that it's been this humbling experience from an educator standpoint to say, hey, we need to get back to what it is we are supposed to do as teachers. What is our role? Because all these things that you might have thought were your role in many regards have been taken away from you. The personal face-to-face connections that you build, the relationships that you build, the way that you have always done things has been taken away from you momentarily. So what's left? And it's not to insinuate in any way that that's easy, but I have, whether this is just me being nerdy and academic or whether it's this sort of genuine fascination with human learning, I have enjoyed that aspect of what we're going through. It's like, yeah, let's cut to the quick. Let's actually talk about what it means to teach and to learn, because those are the conversations we're still going to have. I met with we call it at SP. Everybody does it a little different. SPU, we call our student teachers interns. They're in an
Hmm.
internship, and they do it all year. And so I'm their supervisor, and then their cooperating teacher we call their mentor teacher. So forgive me for, I know people have different systems,
Sure.
so I'll
Yeah.
slip and I'll say something that might be confusing to some. But so I'm their supervisor, and I got to meet with them, and they were going through that similar crisis. I think everybody is. What am I supposed to do? How do I teach choir online? How do I teach elementary school online? I was like, well, let's observe. We are all humbled by this. Professional educators versus new teachers, we're all in the same boat. We're all learning this together. And let's just talk about, what are you trying to teach and how are you trying to teach it? How are you going to assess to see that learning has happened? Let's go back to that. And when we scaled back the insane amount of rhetoric about virtual ensembles and product, versus process. And when we got past all the rhetoric that has complicated a lot of things, again, if I'm speaking candidly, I think when we got to that foundation, there was so much value in that, of the students saying, oh, wow, it's not in any way that it's simple, but there's this beauty in that structure of human learning, of just bringing people to new experiences, asking them to critically reflect upon that experience to then create new personal goals for themselves. It doesn't matter what discipline it is. Psychologists and philosophers have told us that is the process of human learning. So how can you engage with that now that we've stripped it back to that sort of fundamental formula? How can you still insert that formula into the resources that you have? I won't say that it was a fix all. I won't say that it took away the anxiety of my interns, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that it helps frame what we're all going through in a better way, because it's what I'm using. I'm looking at, okay, I really want to do this thing. I don't have the resources to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But how can I look at that activity and find out at its root, how is this engaging people in a music experience? When did I offer them time to reflect upon that experience? And when did I give them time to create new goals for themselves musically? I
Yeah.
think that's the crux of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a way, it kind of reminds me of some great advice I got from Patty Bourne, who's our director of music ed at Western. Um, as and this is a year ago, as I'm pulling out what was left of my hair, because this is me getting ready to teach college for the first time, and okay,
Yeah.
putting together syllabi. I'm seeing things I like from previous offerings of the courses, other things that I think could use revision, and just feeling completely and totally overwhelmed. And Patty's awesome. She just it's very says you break it down and narrow it down to the two or three most essential things a student should get as a result of their experience in this course. You name those things and you just connect everything to that,
Yep.
right? I mean, you don't necessarily have to put on all these bells and whistles and things just for the sake of having something that sparkles. Right? And I found I'm not sure I've done a perfect job of following that advice, but just having that as kind of just having that as kind of a mantra.
Yes.
I have found that my when I've been able to do that, the students get so much out of it, and guess what? The course kind of sparkles, right? So, and it's just been one more way for me as a teacher, at any level, to remind myself that just because I remember my teacher doing this, or we had this assignment, or we did this, the other thing,
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily mean I need to replicate it. Now, sometimes I've done those things because I found legitimate value for what I'm doing, but it's relieved some of the pressure to try to recreate whatever it is that I experienced. Right, kind of like I say, clearing out a lot of the muck and taking on the perspective, okay, well, what is it that students need? If we're talking about music educators, what is it students need to address music teaching, orchestra teaching, whatever the discipline is, in today's schools? Because another thing that I'm thinking about is, I mean, okay, even 2020 notwithstanding, even prior to this, the schools of right now are so much different than the schools of certainly when I was a student,
Ah,
even when I started as a teacher. I mean, and that wasn't all that long ago. It was like 2007 was my first year teaching. Things have changed so much since then. So if I am trying to simply prepare them for where I was then I'm doing them a disservice because
exactly.
that's not the state of the art.
I absolutely love that you bring that up, because I am 100% guilty of that as well. And we're both in similar situations because we were both in our first year. We both came from the classroom and we're both teaching in college the first year last year. And for people that didn't catch, because James already referenced this, but that's actually how we met. We were both, and forgive me because I'm lumping myself into the anecdote that you gave, and I will admit this of myself, but not condemn you to it. I think we were both sort of floundering. It's just like, what's happening and how do we do, so that was how we met. is
Yeah.
is he reached out to me and I was like, oh my god, hello friend, like let's talk about the struggle, right? Hashtag the struggle. It was very real. So we talked. I think that first phone call we had was like an hour and a half or something.
Oh
We
yeah.
just
Oh
talked about
yeah.
it all, and we were like, okay, it's good to know I've got a colleague in arms that is coming from teaching high school and now we're teaching college, and it's just so different. So
Yeah.
anyway, I bring that up because I have far too often in trying to prepare a lot of these classes, I've thought I have to replicate my experiences. I have to give them what I received. Like I have to do for them what was done for me. And then, even worse, the students are coming in with that perspective as well. They're telling themselves, I want to be a middle school band director. I have to be like my middle school band director. I
Yeah.
have to accomplish that. And I have to do the things that they did because I saw that as success. And an interesting experience that I had, I taught a instrumental methods course. It was like all instrumental music methods in the winter quarter last year, and it was a very small section, and I'm talking to one of the students, and I was introducing this text that we were using. We were talking about some concepts, and she just kind of sat back in her seat, and she had this sort of stone face, and I thought that I had like offended her or something, and I could clearly see, because this is a very small class, I could see that she was having this like visceral response to the topic, and I think it was about like fundraising or some administrative aspect, right?
Mhm.
So I'm talking about this like do's and don'ts and some of my experiences, and I just sort of checked in. I was just like, is this all making sense? Like, how are you doing? And I sort of called to her because it was very obvious that she was in conflict about something. And she goes, I never thought about looking at some of my educational experiences through the lens of my teacher, right? I only saw it as a student. And now I'm starting to recognize deficiencies in my education. I'm starting to see that things that I experienced that I just accepted as normal were actually not normal and should not have happened,
Hmm.
because I've only seen it through my student eyes. And now that I'm looking at it as a pre service teacher, I'm realizing that that wasn't best practice and that shouldn't have happened. And I wasn't prepared for that because I was like, well, I'm not like, I don't throw shade like that. You know, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not trying to make you think that you had bad teachers. That's not my goal. I'm just kind of presenting best practices. Like, it was this very intense moment.
Mhm.
And it was really cool because it allowed us to do that metacognitive piece. It allowed us to start talking about what is good teaching, what is a good educator, what's a good band director or choir director, orchestra director, whatever it is, what makes them good. And I'll put this in the comments. I've referenced this before. A colleague, Birch Browning, oh, and I forget, it's not in South Carolina, but he's somewhere over on the East Coast, wrote this great book called An Orientation to Musical Pedagogy. And I used this book in the Intro to Music Ed class. And he introduced something, a topic that's been around for a long time that I had never been familiar with. And this is the um, apprenticeship observation, that when people come into college and they want to be music ed majors, they are bringing with them all of the other educators that they've worked with,
Mhm.
and they only understand music education through those experiences, which arguably are positive. I mean, because I doubt that you would want to be a music educator if you had had bad experiences with music educators. I think that makes sense, right? So
We
they're
kind of have a
bringing that.
self-selected group. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're bringing that with them, and a part of that freshman year, from my perspective, and I hope people don't think this is nefarious, but a lot of what I feel like my responsibility is to practice unlearning for those that are familiar with that concept. So they have to unlearn a lot of those standards, if you will, because they were standards that were unique to their situation. And it's irresponsible to then apply your experiences and only your experiences to all of your future students, and trying to get them to realize, look, I'm not telling you you had a bad choir director in high school, but I am telling you that you had a choir director in high school. They are not the choir director. And as much as you are devoted to them, and we can all speak to that, we all have that educator that we, just worshiped, that they were the epitome of what we wanted to accomplish. I think we all have those mentors, or however you want to refer to them. But that's difficult to try to welcome those freshmen in and get them excited about the craft, but at the same time say, look, that really isn't the only way to teach, and there are ways that we can always be better. And my goal is to get you to have that desire to always want to be better, and to not limit your own goals or your own expectations for yourself just based off of what you've experienced in the past. I
Sure.
love that you brought that up.
Well, and that's kind of one of the things I try to bring to my music ed classes, and I do it a little bit different ways depending on the class. my ped classes. Well, you know as well as I do. One day, 10 meetings. But okay, so I'll put it this way. A running mantra I have is here is a way, or there are multiple ways to skin this cat, so to speak. The way that works out in my class, we only see him once a week. It basically looks like, okay, there are a number of ways to do X, Y, or Z. Here's what I've seen successful in my experience. That's it, because I don't have time to go into much more detail. But with my instrumental music ed class, which sounds kind of similar to yours, I get band and orchestra kids in the room. I try to make a point whenever I can to actually have the students openly talk about and reflect upon what was it like for you when you were in middle school band picking up the clarinet for the first time, or how do you remember your teacher handling X or Y or Z, right? And so we'll have those discussions, and I think that accomplishes at least a couple of different things. One, it shows as the conversation comes out from different people the variety of approaches that exist, right? But also, as we talk through it, I think it adds a bit of nuance to a lot of what you're discussing, which is to say that I remember my impression of my experience in high school orchestra. I remember what I thought I saw happening on the part of the teacher, on the part of the program, on this, that, or the other. So I think the nuance there is that what we perceived as students, kind of like you were saying, that there's this lens aspect. We not necessarily where we okay, we probably most definitely were not aware of all the different things that were happening behind the curtain, so to speak. All the different here's why this teacher went this direction. Here's why this, that, or the other happened. I may have seen this, but really the teacher is handling 8,000 other things along with it. And so as we talk about them and put them in the context of whatever our topic of the week is or whatever, it's kind of fun because the lights start to go on. It's like, oh, there's more to this than met my eye, right? And so again, it kind of feeds into this narrative I try to drive, which is to say that, there's lots of ways of addressing this. And the way it's going to work for that school, that teacher in that situation might be a world different than the way it's going to work, even across town sometimes, let alone across the states or across the country, right? And,
Exactly.
and so I think a part of that nuance, kind of like you're saying, listen, we're not trying to get you to turn against, your choir director, whoever it is, just and what they did may have been fantastic, may have been
Yeah.
great. But what we're saying is that can be a great model, but don't adopt it necessarily as the template,
Yes.
right? Look at the different factors, the different things that fed into that decision, and take those factors and put them in this situation. Are you sure it's going to necessarily lead to the same result?
I think I struggle with that too in the way I present information. People assume I'm trying to be somehow like pious or this
Yeah.
educational martyr, but I consistently remind my students I never want to be, and how do I phrase this? I try to tell them I never want to be the reason that you do something. I want you to have more to justify your decisions as an educator. In other words, I don't want you to be in an educational setting and say, well, I do this because this is the way Professor Hanson taught me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to be able to say, substantiate that to say, well, I do this because when I was in college, I experienced X. I might have been a part of that experience,
Mm-hmm.
but to hang your own convictions and educational practices on one person is irresponsible. It really is. It's just not best practice. A shout out to Ken Watkins, one of my high school friends, who was offering some praise through Facebook. Again, people, please feel free to post comments. I do see them. And was talking about some of our future educators. He's in the choir and worked with Billy Craven. And then Jennifer Wagner, who is one of my mentors, was my high school orchestra director when I graduated. And the reason that I went to college to study music literally helped me get into college. She's an extraordinary educator. They were incredible. They absolutely were. Even knowing now all the things that I know that they were extraordinary teachers. But they taught me a lot of things that I take with me into the classroom, but it's not the only thing I take with me into the classroom.
Sure.
And I think I wanted to talk about this. I think we'll have enough time to explore this. This is a perfect segue. I promise I didn't share notes with James beforehand. It's like you're reading my mind. This is a perfect segue to talk about how you might be addressing some of the things that we're experiencing in the world right now. So I have been hyper conscious. A part of it is my own cultural identity as a cisgender white man, to bring in decolonizing the music curriculum, to bring in, social equity and justice that we might see through our own practices in orchestra and band and choir at the secondary level and elementary school music. Having difficult conversations, things like uniform requirements, and how those can become gendered and create discomfort for our students, and how we navigate that in different communities that might not be prepared to have those conversations. It's interesting. I got to do this was eye-opening for me because at my institution and in the community that I'm teaching in, I feel that it is, I hate to use this word because it's so politically charged, but it's progressive, for lack of a better word. I can talk about things and explore ideas very openly, and I don't feel like I get any backlash from it. I don't feel like people are uncomfortable with me saying, what if we tried it this way? So I feel very affirmed and welcomed. So I did a training um, in another community. Let's just say that. Not my community, because I don't want to put judgment on where I was doing this, but I did this virtual training, and one of the things that I now feel very confident doing is I do an affirmation of name and gender. I want to know what people's preferences are. What would you like me to call you? What's your preferred name? And what is your preferred gender, so that I can make sure that I use the correct pronouns? Or sorry, not the preferred gender, preferred pronouns. I'm mixing those terms. Um, so what are your preferred pronouns? So I decided, like, I put a feather in my cap, like, I'm going to start this virtual session with that, and it's going to be awesome. I also did a land acknowledgement because I wanted to do that, especially being in Seattle and the greater area. This is all land, native land. And so I wanted to do that. So I was like, I'm going to do these things. I've experienced this while teaching at my institution, and I really like it, and I'm going to adopt that, and I want to make it authentic. So I'm going to do it. Man, it was like bombing and stand up. Like, it was so painful because here I am, and I don't know this group. Like, I was hired to come in and do some professional development, and I started off that I'm like, my name's Christopher Hansen, and this is what I do, and it's great to meet you, and I'm going to start off with a land acknowledgement. And the blank stares that I got on the screen of people that were just like, why are you doing this? And then I transition into, I'd like everybody to, share their name and their position and your preferred pronouns.
Mhm.
And it was painful because the rhetoric made fun of the gesture.
Mm,
Like, they
mhm.
would, oh, I'm a he, him, that, it, I don't care, I'll answer to anything. And I'm kind of like, wow, we're losing the sincerity of this and what it means for you to claim your identity
Yeah.
and for you to have ownership over your experience in this. And so I kind of just like smiled and nod, like, you kind of push through those situations. But it was so difficult, and I immediately realized how privileged I was to be in a space where I could talk about those things and promote those things, and I encourage my students to do it. But it brought me back to reality that, yeah, everywhere that you go is not going to be the place that you learned.
Mhm.
And even for the future educators that I'm working with, in our little bubble, we can talk about these great progressive ideas and things that we believe are really important. You might get hired in a community that's not ready for that. So, how do you advocate? When do you advocate? What should you be advocating for? You have to pick and choose your battles. I became, and this was never something I planned on doing, but I became, in the last like 3 years teaching in public school, a very, very big advocate for our trans students.
Mhm.
All the students that we that were open about their trans identity, I was a huge advocate for them. I became an ally, and I was just very passionate about it for the students that I had, for the students that were in our high school and in our general community. It was something that I just never planned on doing it. It just became a part of my teaching career. So, as excited as I was, it became overtly political. I had to be very careful about when and what I said and who I was advocating with. And I ended up, for a long time, had this sort of stigma about me. Oh, there's Chris. He's going to talk about gendered bathrooms, or he's going to start talking about how we need to be careful with our uniforms and watch out because he's going to start yelling at you about bad practices and stuff. And I was like, I don't want people to fear conversations with me in professional environments, but I also am not willing to let go of these convictions because I believe they're important. And I don't think it's just me believing this is important. This is about serving my students in the best way possible. So it was intense. And I'm grateful for those experiences and grateful for the administrative support that I had and the colleagues that supported me, so that I don't think that it was ultimately the demise of my public school teaching career or anything of the sort, but it was
Yeah.
absolutely a part of my experiences. And I want to bring that into the classroom. I think it's important to say, moving forward, all the syllabi that I'm looking at, I'm going, I would usually teach this way, but as of, September 2020, I can't teach it that way anymore. I've
Hmm.
got to open a critical lens. I have to create some freedom to discuss this and explore it, and it can't just be taught this one way. I need to invite these conversations into the classroom. So I'm
Yeah.
curious, how are you feeling about that? Are you feeling the need? Are there directives, or how are you feeling about navigating the state of the world outside the pandemic, these social injustices and inequalities that we're seeing? How are you feeling about bringing that into the classroom?
I think it's vital. So from a conceptual standpoint, I don't see how at this point in the game we can ignore it
Hmm.
and still and still feel like we're doing fidelity to anyone, to our students, to society beyond our rooms, to ourselves. I don't think you can just let it just kind of be this other thing over there. And I think in our field, especially music, I think that's one of the strongest criticisms against the way we've been doing business as usual. I mean, how many times have you heard, or I've even said, you know what? Once they walk into the orchestra room, it's all about the music making and the this, that, and the other. You can everything outside of that, put it away. We're all about here, and it's for your own good because this is going to feed our soul and yada yada yada. Which is, it's dangerous because there's some truth to that, kind of.
Yeah.
But I think as a profession, we've and again, I'm putting myself exactly on the receiving end of this criticism. We have been too happy with being complacent about issues that are, whether we acknowledge them or not, are affecting the lives of our students and our communities. And I say this as a person who spent most of their K-12 career in a predominantly white community. There weren't a whole lot of, we had a number of students of indigenous background, but we didn't, other than that, we didn't have a lot of students of color. But even that, racial issues are affecting your community, if for no other reason than it's hardening this idea of subvert white supremacy.
Yep.
It is, period. And so, how can we go on? How? I mean, how do we do that without addressing that? Right? Especially as teachers, which many of us who teach in music settings are teachers who are kind of a lifeline for students for literally years. You mean to tell me a student's going to sit in our room for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and these things will never be part of the fabric of their instruction? Which isn't to say you stand up on the podium and lecture about social justice. That's not what I'm saying, although sometimes that's warranted. But I'm talking about how it's woven into the very way in which we're teaching, right? So from the state, from the policy, from my ideal standpoint, that's kind of where I am. From a rubber meets the road, I'm struggling to figure out how I do that, especially in the subjects that I'm teaching right now. My load for this fall, for example, I mentioned the upper string pedagogy course, right? Upper string teaching. This isn't exactly a place where I'm going to talk about or spend a lot of time talking about the variety of musical instruments as they're experienced across the world in different cultures. This is really culturally particularized upper string teaching. And if I try to stray too much from that, then I'm not, I mean, that's not what, that's not in the course description, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So I'm struggling to figure out, again, in a one credit class full of students, most of whom, cannot tell a violin from a viola. I'm talking. So I mean, I'm thinking about the bare essentials. How do I weave that? What do I do?
Yeah.
Right. And then my other course, I'm part of the faculty who teaches music theory. I teach the stuff specific to written music theory.
Hmm.
Right away, I've got a problem
Yeah.
because this idea of written music is really particular to the Western classical style and the things that's inspired. And so I feel like I'm put in a bit of a box in terms of how I address these things. So what am I doing? So here with the theory, well, I think one of my biggest things, and we're having this conversation, by the way, in our department, in our
Yeah,
theory
yeah.
area, we're having this, how do we do this? Especially when, for me, my first quarter is, okay, this is the staff, these are rhythms. I mean, real basic stuff, right? I think one of the things that I'm doing is coming out and acknowledging it. Listen, here is the ride you're about to get on. I'm something effective. This is not music theory in the sense that it covers a panacea of music that's practiced around the world. This is some theoretical concepts that are very specific to Western music. Now, that said, I think we have to talk about the fact, this is part of my spiel, that this isn't the only way it's done, right? In fact, most musical cultures would never have any kind of training like this because it isn't written down. So I just want to come out and acknowledge the bias, the curricular bias. That's one thing.
Yes.
Um, Another thing, and I've already started to put this in my syllabus a little bit more sneaky. I'm purposely calling it Western music theory because
Yes.
I think part of the way we can come at this, no matter what we're teaching, is putting those qualifiers. Why do we call this thing music and this thing world music?
Come on, talk about it.
When we say, because behind that idea of music, well, this is the normal, this is right. So I think, fine, I'm going to qualify this thing too: Western art music, Western classical music, Western music as it has been practiced in, this kind of setting, which hopefully gives us the clue that this isn't it. This isn't the extent. This is just one subset. And then I had a great colleague, Chris Hulk, who's one of our composition professors, who has been going to some of those seminars and really kind of brought to the fore in some of our conversations that, listen, one of the things to remember is, even though Western art music culturally is associated with whiteness at its core, people of color, black people, have been there the entire time. The entire time.
And making music,
And
good
making
music.
music, good
Yeah.
music, introducing the violin, for goodness sake, to the Europeans, right? Composing, doing all of these things. So the whiteness implicit in Western art music isn't so much the music itself. It's what has been promoted, what has been valued. The decisions that have been made to only promote white male composers. It's not as if women weren't
Yes.
composing. It's not
Yes.
as if black people or other people weren't composing these styles of music and weren't out there performing doing other things. They were just silenced. So I think that's part of it too. Is again, like you said, turning a critical lens to what it is that we're doing, which I think I'll have a little more room to try to do in my theory class, because we meet thrice a week. But even with that, I mean, again, it takes so long to just get some of the basics. But at the very least, with that class, just coming out front and saying this is, we as a department are recognizing that we, like music departments all over the place, are kind of complicit in this kind of this hierarchical thinking, and we're going to start to break that down over time. For now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to you about the fact that this is a way of music making. This is a way of studying and understanding music. Later on, when we start to get to harmony, I can talk about the fact that not all music is built around, functional harmony, tonic, predominant, dominant. It's great. There's nothing wrong with it. It's awesome. I still love it. Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, bring it on. I'm there. But recognizing that it is not the be all end all, right? So and I think that's what I would encourage any teacher, as we seek to sincerely address this. I think we have to have some balance. You have to take the pressure off of ourselves to have it all figured out and completely and totally woke, so to speak, right now. What are one or two little things you can infuse into the curriculum? And maybe it's not a lecture, maybe it's just a way in which you're designing or talking about things. Maybe you're changing up your language, right?
Yes.
Just one or two little things. Great. Next time you teach this, what's one or two more things? What's one or two more things? Meanwhile, you're reading, you're having conversations, you're challenging yourself and those around you, and as you become more anti-racist, more anti-sexist, more all of these things, it's going to come out. But again, it's through that, plus making the effort to just do one or two things differently, right? Not to feel like we have to, completely overhaul everything and I don't know what I'm doing, right? Do what you know and make it a little bit better. Next time, do what you know, make it a little bit better. You know?
My good friend Janelle, who's teaching up in New York, had made a similar comment because she's teaching in public schools, and also still doing some adjunct work, I believe, and teaching at the university level, and looking at curriculum with the same struggle of how she can promote. I love her list: anti-racism, culturally relevance, being culturally responsive, trauma-informed, progressive, and an ally. Like, it's so much.
Right.
And I've been tagging my mute because you can hear my kiddos are around, and so I wanted to shout amen to almost everything that you were saying because it's so true. And I taught AP music theory when I was teaching high school. And I remember after my first 2 years of teaching, I went to an AP institute and got, sort of trained by the gurus from AP world, and came back and realized how jaded the curriculum was. And so I would have the students say in chorus, literally in chorus, before we would start the new chapter, we are learning about Western tonal music.
Yeah.
And we are discussing theory from the common practice period, the 17th and 18th century. That is our focus. We are looking at a very tiny example because everything we're going to look at is notated. So, I mean, we can't even begin to appreciate the exorbitant amount of music that exists outside of the Western canon because the only thing that has survived our scrutiny is what was written down. There were so many other things that were being written and performed that were never written down, that were just traditions in Europe, no less. I mean, people automatically get that word music purview of like, oh, you must be talking about West African music or East Asian music. Or like, no, I'm talking about in Europe. There were folk songs and traditions in parts of Eastern Europe, incredible music that had never been studied and shared until we get people like Zoltan Kodály, until we get people that travel around trying to capture that and codify it in writing so it can be studied. Russia's a perfect example. The incredible Russian folk music that
Yeah.
ekes into, the Russian vibe. And like, I think it's why I've always been a big proponent of teaching music theory and music history together. I feel like we need to combine those courses because when we isolate music theory, forgive me, I'm on my soapbox, I realize, but when we isolate music theory and we say, this is music theory, we lose that idea of the hegemony of dominant culture.
Yeah.
We are
But I mean,
teaching students that is music. No. This is a type of music, and we know a lot about it because someone wrote it down, so we can scrutinize it, we can analyze it. But there's a lot of other types of music, and
yeah.
it's so important to have that context.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna eke in there. Should we fix the music history curriculum first too, though? I mean,
Oh my gosh. Well,
because I
no,
mean
just the course offerings alone. This is the conversation we're having in my department that we're like,
yeah.
we look at all of this and we have the Black music history course, but we have so isolated it and segregated it within the curriculum, and we look at the course offerings and it's like, European music of the 15th century and European music of the 17th century and European music of the 18th century and European music of the 20th century and American music of the 20th century. And
Yeah.
like, if we're just looking at what we're offering, it's still completely dominated by European traditions.
Right.
And there is value in it. It's not, I've heard this phrase several times lately. It's not an either or, it's both and.
Yes.
And I think that's the issue is even with the idea of the Black Lives Matter movement. Black Lives Matter music is not anti-white. It's not what it is at all, right? To be a feminist doesn't mean that you hate men. It's not either or. It's not to completely disintegrate what it is that we have known before, but it is an unlearning of the dominance of certain cultures. And it's not just white people. It's not meant to villainize white people. It's not meant to villainize European culture. But the idea that there is only one way, I think that is the frustration, is that this is good music, this is bad music, this is right, this is wrong, and trying to project that too far out from what it is that we do. I have to have that difficult conversation with teacher candidates when it's like, yes, there is objectivity in what we do. It is a C sharp or it's not a C sharp.
Right.
There are points at which we can hold firm, and it doesn't have to be, well, I appreciate your C sharp, but it doesn't, like, no, I mean, that's preposterous. Yes, if we're trying to perform a piece correctly that has been written down and codified for us, there is a right or wrong way to do that in order to realize that score. But there are also opportunities to think objectively, promote metacognition, to perform in peace and not ask the students, was it right or wrong, but to say, do you think we performed what was on the page? Little changes like that pedagogically just open students' minds to say, oh, wow, there's more than one perspective. There's more
Right.
than one perception and performance of this piece. And so it's trying to get that paradigm shift to happen in the midst of all of the other chaos. And that's, I
Right.
think, the bigger challenge is these changes need to happen, but it's not, as you pointed out, it's not completely altering every course that we have in the catalog.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and
making,
doing it right now.
yeah,
You know.
making the tiny, and Janelle Festo commented on Facebook. I don't know if you can see them. She said she appreciates your point of just changing one or two things at a time and just taking it one step at a time. And that, I would argue, for all educators, it's
Mhm.
something worth doing and humbling yourself with, even at the beginning of the year. I know for a fact on my first day of class tomorrow, I will begin by saying, here are the things that I am trying to figure out. Here are the things that I feel confident with. And
Yep.
here are the things that I am working on changing. So your feedback is appreciated. And I want you to know that some of these things are just ideas. Some of these things are things I'm experimenting with. We perpetuate that trope that, educators are the sage on the stage. They have to know everything.
Yeah.
And I want to break that to say, no, I'm a person that's committed to teaching, and I chose to teach at the college level, but I am not somehow more important or more significant than any other educator. And 2 weeks ago, I had a great teacher talk um, with Rodal,
Yeah.
who's the
He,
person who took over
he.
your position, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Which is extraordinary. So Mr. Rodal and I were talking, and we had that realization that as you're making these changes, to know that you are constantly evolving and being in that process and bringing your students to it, because the elementary school teacher is just as valuable as the college professor.
Oh,
The idea that we
if
have
not more.
socially changed it, yeah, that, well, oh, you're just an elementary school
Oh
teacher,
yeah.
is blasphemy.
Yeah.
It's blasphemy. And we have to pull away from those, again, social perceptions, that social projection. I said something that's arguably taboo that I am probably too candid to admit, but like, I took a pay cut teaching college.
Hmm.
I remember having to have that difficult conversation with my mother to say, like, you are seeing the professorship or like academia as some sacred hallowed ground. Like, I'm a teacher.
Hmm.
I'm still a teacher, and I should be. Like, that's my job. That's why I'm teaching here. But even with my students, there is that, like, well, now I'm in college and I'm studying from the professor. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, like, I've worked hard to get here, and not
Hmm.
just anyone can go teach at a college. Like, there, absolutely, you deserve a certain amount of respect in any position or field where you're teaching and you become an expert in it. Or so I don't want to get rid of the idea of the respect that faculty at every level deserve, but at the same time, it's just mind blowing to me that this social perception of, like, well, you're a university faculty member, so
Hmm.
therefore you must make six figures, and like, you are the expert on these areas. It's like, no, I am a teacher first. I am at a school because I want to be a teacher. So presenting that to your students and saying, I know a lot, but I also don't know a lot. And I
Hmm.
will share some of the things that I know with you and invite you to think with me. I think that in and of itself is transformative. Even if you're teaching something like theory, which is painfully objective at times, here's how I have learned this. Here's what I know how to do. But what is your perspective? Jacques Rancière, who I love to quote, says, man is a will served by an intelligence. And the most powerful thing that teachers can ask is, what do you think? So
Hmm.
that we are not in control of the learning and the knowledge. It's not what I know that you have to get. That's that, Freirean banking model. It's not about me giving you the information. It's about you being inquisitive and curious and us working through it together. And the last name that I'll drop is, of course, Maxine Green, because I love to quote her anytime that I can. One of my favorite quotes from her, and actually, I'll do this. I'm going to attempt to share a screen on this platform. We'll see if I can do it. This is on my desktop. I am forever on the way.
Oh, absolutely.
This is my desktop, and I keep it there because it is something that I want every one of my students and myself to affirm on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Her wisdom is unparalleled, in my opinion, in the field of art and education, and I think about this on a daily basis. I'm never done. I'm not supposed to be. As a musician,
Hmm.
as an artist, as a composer, as a conductor, as an educator, as a father, as a man, and all the identities that I have in my life. I'm never done. And
Yeah.
at any point that I think that, that's a travesty because I've lost perspective on the opportunity to grow.
Oh yeah.
So forgive me for that long rant, but so much of what you said, and I'm going to try to mute myself to finish this conversation
Oh,
as you
you're
can
good.
hear the chaos behind me. But everything that you said, I could not agree with more. We have to contextualize what it is that we're teaching, and just that preface is transformative. Just
Hmm.
to say Western theory, right? Like just
Hmm.
Western tonal music, just to say that, to position them, to invite the critique of, oh, so there are other ways to think about this chord or this harmony or this melody. Be like, yes, there are.
Well, and talk about putting yourself out there. Yes, there are, but because I'm a product of the same system that's been on, I can't tell you all that much about them. So here I'm putting myself out there, and part of my thing is talking to students about the fact that we as a department, we as a field, are starting to wake up to this, and so I'm hoping that these students who are going to mostly are going to be first year college students, I'm hoping that over the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, you will see some changes, and you will see us start to open this thing up a little bit. And I think that fits right in with what you're talking about. It's like we're always on the path. One of the things I've always said is the day I think I've got it figured out is the day I need to retire, because at that moment I become very dangerous.
Amen.
And that's, like you said, with anything that I'm doing.
I think that is a perfect sentiment to finish with. I can't believe it's already been an hour. I absolutely love talking to you, sir, and it's so empowering to know that I have colleagues all over the world, yourself included, that are making real change. I'm so excited to see the things that you're doing at Western, and happy to be able to work with you. I know this won't be our last conversation, but I hope through Janelle, thank you for listening, and others that might be watching this when it's archived on YouTube, that feel free to share this conversation and join it. Feel free to message us if you want to talk about some of these concepts, or share this with others and start this conversation about what does teacher training look like now? How are we trying to balance the social justice and inequalities that we're seeing and that we want to promote as educators, but also the pedagogical components of how we're reimagining what it is that we do virtually, and how do we get to the root of what teaching and learning is, and how do we keep ourselves learning as educators? How do we continually humble ourselves and know that this is a process and that we keep going? I'm going to steal James' thought and reiterate, the day that you think that you figured it all out, that's the day to retire, because none of us are there, and I hope that we don't get there. I hope that we continue to push each other to see new opportunities to teach and to learn. James, thank you again so much for your time. I'll have you stay on so I could say goodbye to you after I stop the live stream. For everybody that watched, again, thank you for tuning in to a Teacher Talk. I'll be here again next week with a new guest. Feel free to message me if you have some particular topics that you want to explore, some people that you'd like to see me speaking with, and we will continue these conversations and explore the incredible hope that we should all have and the possibilities in front of us. Hope you guys have an incredible week and a safe return to your schools. We'll talk to you again soon.